So with a lot of exposure to different types of training in different fields, academic fields, boxing, fencing, other types of activity, I've kind of come up with a list of things that I think are pretty helpful for cultivating success. First though, I want to talk about my modified Bloom's taxonomic model of adult learning. Basically, you have to climb up the pyramid, right? So at the bottom, you've got a nominal understanding of a thing. That means you can identify what the thing is. Functional understanding means that you know how to generally use it. Philosophical understanding means you know how to use it in ways that it's not necessarily intended for. Spiritual understanding is a little bit outside of our purview, but that's where you have kind of the wholly abstract understanding of a thing. And if you notice here, we've got abstraction increasing as you go up the little pyramid here, right? So it gets more abstract the higher you go. So what we're gonna go over here, a couple steps to helping you cultivate success. Number one, you need a firm methodological teaching approach of principles that can be remembered and applied in lots of places in life. So what that does, principles help you shortcut decision making. Basically, you can go through the decision-making process, whatever your personal or organizational decision-making process is, faster by having principles that help you align and prioritize the different types of friction that you encounter when you're trying to solve a problem. Number two, principles facilitate interdisciplinary thought. If you have skills that you take from somewhere else in life that you're applying to the thing that you're learning, and then you start taking skills that you learn and apply them to other parts of your life, well, you're gonna have a better learning experience. So, C, provide feedback and feedback reinforcement based tools and practices. So basically, you want all of the different approaches that you're taking to provide feedback, or you as a teacher, coach, mentor need to provide feedback from an outside perspective using whatever tools necessary. You need to have constant exposure to higher order principles interspersed with the basics. So while you're teaching the basic, like in boxing, you're teaching somebody how to jab, start giving them the higher level principles. Why and how you throw the jab can change based off of specific circumstances, stuff like that. Crawl, walk, run, sprint. Basically, you want to start out nice and easy, make it a little bit more difficult, make it a little bit more difficult, make it a little bit more difficult still. We're going to talk about that in number two here in a minute. Multimodal teaching approaches. Not everybody learns the same, and even though there are better and worse learning principles to apply, you have to make sure that you're tailoring the way you teach things to your specific students and see what they're the most receptive to. If you tailor your message where appropriate to the different types of learning that your students do, you're gonna just be a more successful coach or a teacher. Use sensory stimulation and physical activity. So if you're teaching something that's not an inherently physical activity like history, being able to use sensory stimulation and physical activity are ways that you can help commit things to memory. And unfortunately, a byproduct of the American education system is that history has been reduced to names, dates, events, and kind of very loosely relationships. So it's very hard for some students to just perform rote memorization of those things. So you're better off doing something that helps them contextualize the information. If you're teaching boxing, right, instant feedback, biofeedback, like getting jabbed in the face from a sparring partner, is a good way to help you remember, hey, keep your hands up, use your catch, move your head, stuff like that. So even though the two activities, boxing and teaching history, are very different, good and sound teaching principles apply to both. And what you see, unfortunately, in both careers of teachers, coaches, or mentors in both fields, people don't necessarily have a good understanding of how they can integrate training, tips, techniques from other fields into the one that they're using. And so a lot of the time students kind of get changed by their instructors. All right, frame the interrogative. That's just a fancy way of saying Help students formulate questions. That's just as equally important between history as it is with boxing or any other type of martial art or whatever sport, activity you're learning. Always get your students to ask questions, because there's a specific component of learning that comes from creating good questions. And that's really at the heart of history. We don't teach it that way until you get past grad school, but what you really need to focus on in history is the maintenance of the interrogative, the construction of questions, and keeping those questions in the back of your mind while you're learning. All right, always give the why. If you're teaching somebody something, tell them why they're doing the steps, especially with younger learners today. It's been an increasingly alarming trend that teachers fail to give the why. And I know that 100 years ago, no instructor gave the why. You just learned because they told you to. Well, now we understand that with different populations, that's not always necessarily the best way. So it's important to give the why. And a lot of times boxers don't want to hear why you're teaching them a thing, but they're going to learn faster and they're going to learn better if you just go ahead and give it to them, right? Give them the tools necessary to help create a context for what you're teaching them. And lastly, focus on making the training self-sufficient. So if you give the student enough of the biofeedback indicators or enough of the information that they know how to learn and how to self-correct, most importantly, then you don't have to spend as much time giving them individual pieces of information. If they have a good foundational understanding, then they're going to be able to create a self-training or a homework study, whatever you want, whatever's relevant to what you're teaching them, a program that can help them prioritize success and, more importantly, make success a habit. Number 2, incremental exposure to success and failure. You don't want your student to experience either success or failure in isolation. Exposing them to both creates an opportunity for you as the instructor or you as the person who knows how the training cycle should go. It gives you the ability to give your student some key means of identifying success and failure and how those different circumstances came about. So, you want to make sure they get incremental exposure to both. So, A, start with a highly controlled and predictable environment. You want the successes and the failures to be predictable. And you want to help the student be able to identify which direction they're trending in the middle of an exercise if possible. B, vary the stimuli but allow early successes while explaining why they were successes. And that goes for the failures too. You want to make sure that you change the conditions of success and failure and change the conditions of what bring about those different states. And you want to make sure that you do it in a way where students can identify trends. What changed in my environment or in the context of my lesson that helped me succeed? What changed in my environment or in the context of the lesson that made me fail? And what can I do differently to change which direction I'm heading in? And while you think you might never want to head towards failure, getting a student to figure out how they triggered that in their own behavior or in their own pathway to the end of an exercise, if you get them to see that experience, it'll help. Exposure to failure is extremely important. Now, you don't want that to be the thing that a student latches onto, because then they're going to start to make a habit of all the things that bring about failure. That's why you have to have exposure to success too. Help identify successful training approaches per student. Don't forget about this part, right? Just because it works for one or two doesn't mean it's going to work for all of them. So that they can, or help identify successful training approaches per student that they can replicate and practice on their own. So I mentioned earlier that it's important to help students cultivate a process that they can work on by themselves so they can get extra reps with minimal supervision. And that's also part of incremental exposure to success and failure, because if you do that well, then they can help guide themselves to success. Let students study their peers' successes and failures and guide study sessions together. So when you have one student who is a lot better off or a lot worse off than the other students, it's good in a constructive environment to help the other students see why that's the case. And I don't think we capitalize on that enough. And if you want to build, especially in a team, a more empathetic group of athletes or of learners who are going to be mutually supportive, getting them to help their peers from failure to success is a great way of doing that. It's a good way to build teams. Because at the end of the day, a more effective team is going to be one that faces adversity together and is mutually supportive and inclusive of one another, obviously. Help students make good habits out of effective training approaches. So at the end of the day, success and failure ultimately are both habits. They're aggregate habits. That means they're both habits that are contingent upon other habits. If you eat the right things, train the right way, learn the right way, then all the things you're trying to achieve are going to be more likely to come about than if you do not do those things the right way. So as both are habits, aggregate habits, what you need to do is make sure that success becomes the habit that wins first. If that becomes a habit, then you're going to have people that are a role model to the other students. And getting them to start to align with the student who's the most successful is definitely how you cultivate a good learning environment. Lastly, make students practice training each other and accept 360-degree feedback. The best students are receptive to feedback, whether it's praise or whether it's critical feedback. They have to be able to accept both. And if you're a good teacher, you should be exposing them to both. And one of the ways that you can help enhance that and you can make the students more supportive of each other is by giving them the opportunity to give and accept 360-degree feedback. That means if your A student is getting feedback from the F student, that has to happen, and vice versa. The F student has to get the feedback from the A student. Neither one of them should get any priority of time or resources. And I know that's going to stick in the craw of a lot of people who are going to say, well, my A student or my best fighter is the one that gets me paid. Your job as a coach, teacher, mentor, whatever, is to provide every single one of those students the opportunity to excel to the best of their ability. And if you're not doing that, you're a failure. So that might not be popular among the constituency of the people watching my video, but I don't care. It's true. So if you know what your job is as a coach, teacher, or mentor, then you need to be doing it. And in this case, in this context, that is providing each of your students with the best possible circumstances to bring about their success. So, all right, I got more of these, but this is all I'm gonna do today. Thanks for watching. All right, step 3, cultivate the correct form of confidence. So you don't want to shake them, but you also don't want to build them up too far. So how can you try to achieve the right balance? Well, force the most successful students to bear a greater burden of responsibility to help their peers. Your A students need to help your F students. Need to. They need to find their success as a responsibility, because if they think it's going to be the thing that punches their ticket, they're going to cultivate a bad sense of character through success. B, do not favor the good students. Give them a chance toward character growth through increased responsibility. So you're going to make them better people. And if you're a coach, teacher, or mentor, you need to ensure that you're not just making an athlete, you need to make a good man or woman. And part of that is giving them increased responsibility in the gym, in the classroom, whatever, not just to their peers, but also to the team, to the facility, etc. C, focus on getting the strongest students to identify the external factors of their success. What were the things that got them to be successful outside of what they did themselves? Was it because they went to a certain training program? Was it because they got help with X, Y, or Z? Is it just because they were eating better? What are those things that are external to the student that help them succeed? Because that's going to be one of the things that they can help change in the lives of the other students. Say, hey, look, I did X, Y, or Z. This helped me get there. This can also help you. And somebody who has a good drive towards success should want to build that success in their peers so they have better competition, because better competition ultimately will make you better at whatever you're doing. Do not hold back the strongest students by training to the standards of the weakest. Make the weakest train to the standards of the strongest. Physically, mentally, doesn't matter. You need to make sure that everybody's being held to the same high standard and do not reduce it. End statement right there. Do not lower the training requirements for the weaker students. Force them to elevate and force their peers who are more successful to elevate the weakest students. Find the right balance between support and competition, right? You don't want anybody being babied, and you don't want your fighters or your students trying to kill each other. Strike the balance and make that a prime tenet of the culture of your training organization. Lastly, iron sharpens iron. So make it hard and make it meaningful. The emotive experience on top of the intellectual and physical experience will be the thing that helps them remember the most important aspects of their training. So make it hard and make it meaningful. All right, well, I said I was only gonna do this too, but I like it. So, number 4, make success your community culture. So the success and failure of one reflects the many. So one person on your team, their individual success and failure reflects the success and failure of everybody else. And that is just the way it should be. That's how you create a team that's mutually supportive. You don't want blame to take hold. No good organization allows blame. Good organizations allow feedback. Good organizations allow problem identification, but they don't allow blame. B, the top priority of the culture is a specifically defined objective towards success, not necessarily success itself, through effort and efficiency. Your team should value efficiency and they should value effort. But it should not be standing on the shoulders of a couple people or the people at the bottom, right? The people at the top should be expected to do more. I know, that's so egalitarian, blah, 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 blah. Well, if they can do the most, then they need to do the most. C, create leaders of initiative by being one yourself. Anywhere in the organization. I don't care if you're the lowest ranking man or woman on the totem pole. All right, now, because I'm a firm advocate of reverse order planning, we're going to go over defining success, because this is really what needs to happen first. But everything you do needs to have a clearly identified definition of success, one that's measurable and one that you can kind of evaluate every so often to make sure you're doing it the best way possible for your organization. So, A, what is success to each student? How do they define their own individual success? You as a teacher need to be acutely aware of this. Next, what does success mean to the organization? And last, to the trainers. What does success mean to them? How do they define their success? Because success here and success here is not necessarily the same, nor should it be. B, have specific but not rigid definitions of success. So it's important to understand what you think success is, how you quantify it, how you qualify it, but it can't be overly rigid, because those standards of success may change over time as they should. If your organization stays together for a long time, then you should have an evolutionary understanding of what success is. You need to make sure that your definitions are adequately captured to demonstrate that. C, give all parts of the organization ownership of their portions of team success. Every individual is part of a larger whole, and that means whatever organizational success is breaks down into individual constituent elements that every single person from the top to the bottom of the organization must possess ownership of. And they need to make sure that they're doing what they can at their level, at the level of their parts of the team, to be able to ensure success for the whole team, right? Don't let the competitive spirit between different parts of the organization tear the organization apart. D, do not give ultimatums or unrealistic expectations. We see this all the time. We're going to be the best in the world. I'm going to be the best of the world. So-and-so is going to be the best of the world. You know what? The best of the world of any activity is probably some unnamed guy or some guy you've never heard of that lives in a cave and trains by himself, right? Who knows? Or he lived 100 years ago, or he's going to live 100 years from now. Trying to be the best of anything is a false god. People will chase after that and they'll lose themselves, right? Instead of being enriched by the experience, they'll obsess over the end. And that's never a healthy way to approach anything. So, ultimatums saying you better do this or, you're kicked off the team is only going to demotivate your people. And setting unrealistic expectations like, oh, you're going to be the greatest tomorrow, that's not going to motivate them either. And, they say that false motivation is better than no motivation, and that's true. However, you can only fake it till you make it so far. And making people uncomfortable or demotivating them like this means that all of their motivation is going to be false, and ultimately it's going to be evaporated. So, do not give ultimatums or unrealistic expectations. E, do not allow fear, jealousy, or ego to take root. These are the team killers, right? Whether you're in combat and this is your fire team, whether this is your team of Olympic boxers, whether this is your debate team in middle school, doesn't matter. Fear, right? Being afraid of what the task is. Jealousy amongst the people on the team, or ego, individuals thinking that they themselves are more important than the team. Every single one of those things will tear your team apart. Obviously. F, let your team enjoy the process more than victory, and they will fight harder to win. So if you make them love the process, you make them love the trainers, and you make them love the activity, all of a sudden they start to train and they take greater initiative. If they're only focusing on victory, then at their first sign of defeat, that's going to be the end of it. They're not going to have any internal machinations whatsoever towards success. And this is a big one, especially among type A high performance athletes, right? At some point, victory becomes more important than the activity and they stop loving it. And sure, they may make money, but they're going to have a very limited understanding of the experience. And you as a coach, a teacher, or a mentor need to be ensuring that their motivations stem from the process and stem from loving the organization, loving the team, loving the trainers, right? You want success to be an act of love, not in itself an act of adversity. G, reward effort and keep the focus on appreciation that you get to do what you're doing, right? So I'm a firm believer that appreciation is the greater half of joy. If you focus on appreciating a moment, it's better than relishing in the moment itself because the moment is fleeting. But if you understand the appreciation for the moment, you say, hey, I'm really glad I get to do this right now with these people, that is a sentiment that can last longer than the moment itself, and it gives you a better memory. So these have been some of the ways that, in my experience doing combat sports, training for combat and war in the military, These are just things that I've seen successful teams do, and the things that I've seen successful leaders of those successful teams do to help make sure that those teams are successful. Anyway, thanks for watching.